The first time I realized I was no longer welcome in my own family, it wasn't during a fight. It was during a wedding planning meeting I was never invited to. I found out by accident the way you learn the truth when people assume you won't push back. A forwarded email landed in my inbox late one Tuesday night, sent by my younger sister without thinking. The subject line read "Final Guest List" and "Estate Seating." My name wasn't on it. I stared at the screen longer than I should have, waiting for my brain to catch up with what my eyes were already processing. The wedding was in 6 weeks. Christmas adjacent. A big deal in our family. My parents had been talking about it nonstop for months. Yet somehow I was no longer part of the conversation. I wasn't uninvited. That would have required acknowledgement. I had simply been omitted. My name is Lauren Hale. I'm 33 years old. I live in Portland, Oregon, and I work as a contracts manager for a regional construction firm. On paper, my life is steady, quiet, predictable. That predictability took years to earn. Growing up, I was the reliable one. The daughter who showed up early, stayed late, read fine print, and fixed things no one else wanted to touch. My parents, Martin and Ellen Hale, liked to say I was mature for my age. What they meant was compliant. My sister Rebecca was different. 4 years younger, louder, softer edged. The kind of person people lean toward naturally. She cried easily and was forgiven quickly. I learned early that being low maintenance made me invisible. When our grandmother passed away 3 years ago, she left behind more than grief. She left property. A lakefront house in Northern California, some farmland outside Medford, and shares in a small but profitable family logistics company she had helped build decades earlier. She also left instructions. The assets were to be held in trust until Rebecca's wedding. After that, ownership would be redistributed. Nothing unusual, except for one detail no one talked about unless they had to. I was named interim trustee, not because I was the oldest, not because I asked, but because my grandmother trusted me to follow directions without rewriting them to suit my feelings. At least that's what I told myself. For 3 years, I handled everything: property taxes, maintenance contracts, shareholder communications. My parents deferred to me publicly, praised me privately, and reminded me often how grateful they were. Until the wedding plans began. That email sat open on my laptop, while the house around me stayed silent. No apology followed. No explanation. Just a quiet realization settling into my chest. They were planning the future without me. I scrolled through the email thread. Seating arrangements. Estate access. Who would give which speech. Where the keys would be stored. Decisions that assumed authority. Assumed I would step aside. My phone buzzed, a text from my mother. "Did you see the dress Rebecca chose? It's beautiful." I typed back slowly. I didn't know there was a final guest list yet. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared. Oh, that. Your father and I thought it would be easier to streamline things. Less confusion. Streamline. A word people use when they want obedience without conversation. Am I not invited? I asked. There was a pause long enough for my screen to dim. Of course you're invited, Lauren. My mother finally replied. Don't be dramatic. I didn't respond, because something had shifted, not emotionally, logistically. They hadn't told me to step back. They had simply stopped including me. And that was worse. It meant they believed I would adjust on my own. I forwarded the email to my work account and closed my laptop. That night, I lay awake replaying small moments I'd ignored before. My father asking if I really needed to be so involved. My sister joking that I'd probably be bored at the wedding anyway. My mother reminding me that once Rebecca was married, things would finally settle. Settle for whom? The next morning, I logged into the trust portal before work. Not with suspicion, with clarity. And that's when I saw it. A draft document uploaded 2 days earlier, titled Asset Transition Proposal, prepared by a law firm I didn't recognize, marked Internal Review. I opened it. The proposal outlined a revised distribution schedule, accelerated, consolidated. My role as trustee labeled temporary and no longer necessary. Authority transferred to my parents effective immediately after the wedding. No mention of my consent, no mention of discussion. Just assumptions dressed up as efficiency. I closed the document without downloading it, sat back, breathed. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a quiet removal. At work that day, I did my job. Reviewed clauses, flagged inconsistencies, signed off on contracts that would hold up under scrutiny. I felt oddly calm, as if my body had recognized the pattern before my mind caught up. When you've been managing risk long enough, you know when one is finally unavoidable. That evening, I called my grandmother's old attorney, not to accuse, not to threaten, to ask one question. What happens if a trustee is removed without notification? There was a pause on the line. That depends, he said carefully. Were you formally notified? No. Then they don't have authority yet. I thanked him and hung up. I didn't feel angry. I felt alert. Because the people who taught me to stay quiet had just made a critical mistake. They had acted as if I no longer mattered. And for the first time in my life, I was going to let them find out what happened when I stopped compensating for that belief. I didn't confront anyone right away. That surprised me. In the past, when something felt off, my instinct was to clarify, smooth, explain. I had spent most of my adult life translating tension into manageable language so other people could stay comfortable. This time I did nothing. I let the silence stretch. Over the next week, the omissions became louder. My sister Rebecca stopped looping me into wedding logistics entirely. Group chats went quiet. Phone calls were brief and strangely polite, like conversations with a distant relative instead of a sister who used to call me when she needed something fixed. My parents followed the same pattern. My mother asked about work, the weather, trivial things. My father talked around the wedding, but never about it directly. No one mentioned the trust. That silence wasn't accidental, it was strategic. They were waiting for me to accept the new shape of things without resistance. I didn't. Instead, I watched. At work, I reviewed contracts with renewed attention. It was almost ironic how closely my professional life mirrored what was happening at home. In both places, power lived in language, in what was stated clearly, and what was assumed. One afternoon during a routine review, I noticed something that made me pause. A subcontractor agreement I'd approved months earlier had been amended. The amendment shifted liability subtly but significantly. Not illegal, just advantageous to one party. The kind of change that only becomes visible if you know where to look. I caught it immediately. That was when it clicked. This wasn't just about the wedding, or even about my role in the family. This was about control. Back home, I logged into the trust portal again. This time I downloaded everything. Not selectively, everything. Statements, drafts, correspondence, metadata. Patterns began to emerge. Small decisions made without me. Consultations with advisors I hadn't approved. Language that softened my authority while elevating my parents' involvement. They weren't removing me abruptly. They were hollowing out the role until it no longer mattered. That night, my mother called. "Your father and I were thinking," she said casually. "Maybe you'd like to enjoy the wedding without responsibilities. You've always carried so much." It sounded caring, thoughtful, reasonable. I understood it for what it was. "You're saying I shouldn't be involved anymore," I replied. She laughed lightly. "Oh, Lauren, you always hear things so sharply." I didn't argue, I didn't explain. I said one sentence. "I'm still the trustee." There was a pause. "Yes, of course," she said quickly. "For now." For now. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table long after my tea went cold. That phrase echoed louder than any accusation. For now. The next morning, I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer in downtown Portland. Not my grandmother's attorney. Someone neutral. Someone who didn't know our family story. Her name was Dana Morales. She specialized in trust disputes and family asset transitions. She listened without interrupting as I laid out the facts. No emotions, just structure. When I finished, she leaned back. "They're attempting a soft removal," she said. "Common in families where confrontation is avoided. They're betting you won't escalate." "What happens if I don't?" I asked. "Then they'll keep pushing until you're irrelevant. And if I do?" She met my eyes. "Then things get uncomfortable. For them." I nodded. "What would you advise?" She didn't answer immediately. "First, don't tip your hand. Second, document everything. Third, be prepared for the possibility that this isn't just about authority, but money." That last word landed heavily. "Money changes people," Dana continued, "especially when they think they're entitled to it." On my drive home, I passed the neighborhood where my parents lived. Same house, same manicured lawn, same carefully maintained image. I realized then how much of my role in the family had been invisible labor. I protected the systems that allowed everything to look stable, and now they wanted the benefits without the guardrails. The next escalation came from Rebecca. She called late, her voice brittle. "Mom says you're being distant." I let the silence stretch. "Are you upset about something?" she asked. I considered how to answer. "I'm observing," I said. That annoyed her. You're always doing that, she snapped, watching instead of just being happy for me. I waited. This is my wedding, Lauren. Not everything has to involve you. I understood then that she believed this story fully, that my absence was my choice, that my role was optional. I didn't correct her. I simply asked, do you know about the asset transition proposal? She went quiet. What proposal? So they hadn't told her. That told me more than anything else. I'm sure you'll hear about it soon, I said calmly. She hung up shortly after. 2 days later, Dana emailed me. She had reviewed the documents I sent. There's something you should know, she wrote. The draft proposal references a letter of intent dated last year, signed by your parents. It implies consent from all parties, including you. I stared at the screen. I had never signed such a letter. I called her immediately. Is it legally binding, I asked? Not without your signature. But it suggests they've been laying groundwork, creating a paper trail of assumed agreement. Assumed consent. The same pattern, repeated. That night I didn't sleep much. Not because I was anxious, but because my mind was reorganizing years of memory under a new lens. The times my opinion had been overridden gently, the decisions framed as already made, the praise that always came with expectation. I had mistaken approval for affection. What I was experiencing now wasn't betrayal in the dramatic sense. It was something colder, erasure. The next morning I made a decision. I emailed Dana. I want to prepare for formal action, quietly. Her reply came quickly. I'll draft options. When you're ready, we move. I closed my laptop and sat back. Nothing had exploded yet. No one was yelling. No bridges burned. But the ground beneath my family was no longer stable. And they didn't realize that the person who used to hold it together had already stepped back. The wedding countdown accelerated. Invitations went out. Hotel blocks filled. My parents' house became a staging ground of floral samples and seating charts. I learned all of this secondhand through casual mentions and overheard fragments like someone listening to a conversation from the next room. No one asked for my help anymore. That absence was intentional. When you want someone to relinquish power quietly, you don't confront them. You starve the role until it collapses on its own. I let it happen. On the surface, I became agreeable. I showed up when invited. I smiled. I congratulated Rebecca on her dress. I commented on flower choices. I never mentioned the trust. Inside, I was doing something very different. Every evening after work, I reviewed documents Dana had helped me organize. Not just trust records, but timelines, emails, file creation dates, who initiated which conversations and when. The more I read, the clearer the pattern became. 6 months earlier, my father had contacted a new financial advisor without telling me. 4 months earlier, my mother had asked for copies of trust summaries for reference. 3 months earlier, a law firm was engaged to draft a transition plan. They hadn't woken up one day and decided to push me aside. They had planned it, carefully, slowly, with the confidence of people who believed resistance would never come. One night, Dana called me instead of emailing. Lauren, she said, there's something else. I sat down. The trust distributions are tied to the wedding date, she continued. Once it happens, your authority changes automatically unless you intervene. Intervene, how, I asked? By asserting your position before the triggering event, legally. The word legally landed with weight. That would mean formal notice, she added. It wouldn't be subtle. I stared at the wall. What happens if I don't? Then they execute the plan they've been preparing, and you become irrelevant overnight. That was the moment the illusion finally broke. I hadn't been sidelined accidentally. I was on a clock. After I hung up, I walked through my apartment touching familiar things. My bookshelf, the kitchen counter, the stack of unopened mail I'd been ignoring. I thought about all the times I'd postponed my own life because my family needed something. The trips I didn't take, the moves I delayed, the relationships I deprioritized. I had always believed there would be a moment when it was my turn. That moment, I realized, was never coming unless I took it. The next day, my mother invited me to lunch. Just the two of us, she said. We never get time alone anymore. The restaurant was quiet, familiar. She ordered for us both, as she always had. You seem distracted lately, she said gently. I watched her closely. The way she tilted her head, the practiced concern. I'm focused, I replied. On what? On finishing things properly. She smiled. That's always been your strength. I let that sit. She leaned forward. I hope you know how much we appreciate everything you've done. Truly. I nodded. And we want you to enjoy the wedding. No stress, no obligations. There it was again. Enjoyment framed as removal. I met her eyes. Am I still the trustee? Her smile faltered just slightly. Technically, yes, she said. But things are changing. Families evolve. I didn't argue. I said I need copies of all correspondence related to the trust from the past year. Her eyes sharpened. Why? Because I'm responsible for it, I replied calmly, until I'm not. She studied me, then laughed softly. You don't trust us. Trust and authority aren't the same thing, I said. The rest of lunch passed in polite tension. That evening, Rebecca called. Mom says you asked for documents, she said, irritation barely contained. Why are you doing this now? Because I should have done it sooner. You're making this about you, Lauren. I let the silence stretch. This is my wedding, she continued. Grandma wanted it this way. Did she tell you that I asked? Rebecca hesitated. Mom said. I stopped her gently. Mom isn't Grandma. That ended the conversation. 2 days later, Dana sent me a draft notice. Formal, precise, non-accusatory. It asserted my authority as trustee and requested that all asset transition discussions cease until after a full review conducted with my participation. Once sent, there would be no pretending nothing was happening. I read it 3 times. My finger hovered over the trackpad. This was the point of no return. Not because it would start a fight, but because it would end the version of the family where my compliance was assumed. I thought about Christmas mornings, birthday dinners, the way silence had always been rewarded. I thought about my grandmother sitting at her kitchen table with documents spread neatly in front of her, refusing to be rushed. I signed. Dana sent the notice that afternoon. By evening, my phone was lighting up. Missed calls, texts, voicemails. I didn't respond, because for the first time I wasn't reacting. I was acting. And I knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next would be louder, harsher, and more revealing than anything before. The wedding was 3 weeks away, and the quiet removal they'd planned so carefully had just failed. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, controlled at first, then sharper. The morning after Dana sent the notice, my mother left a voicemail that sounded calm until you listened closely. Her words were measured, but her breathing wasn't. Lauren, we received something from your attorney. I'm sure this is a misunderstanding. Call me. I didn't. By noon, my father tried. This doesn't need to become a legal issue, he said without greeting. We're family. I let the silence do the work. Lauren, I answered then, I am still the trustee. That was all. He exhaled hard through his nose. You didn't have to embarrass us like this. That word again, embarrass. This wasn't about trust law or inheritance. It was about image, control. Who appeared to be in charge? I didn't argue, I didn't defend. I said all future communication should go through counsel. He hung up. The shift was immediate. Group messages stopped. Wedding updates went silent. When Rebecca posted dress photos online, I was tagged last, almost as an afterthought. At work, I functioned normally. That was the strangest part. My hands didn't shake. My focus didn't fracture. It was as if removing myself emotionally from my family had freed up an entire part of my mind. That evening, Dana called. They're pushing back, she said. Their attorney contacted me. They're claiming your notice is disruptive and unnecessary. I smiled faintly. That means it worked. It means they didn't expect it, Dana corrected. And they're regrouping. Regrouping how? Likely by reframing the narrative. Painting you as emotional, overreacting, unstable under pressure. I considered that. They've been doing that my whole life, I said. Dana paused. Then softly, that's why this is effective. 2 days later, my parents requested an in-person meeting. Neutral location, their lawyer present. They wanted to clear the air. I agreed. Not because I wanted peace, because I wanted to see how they behaved when their authority was formally challenged. We met in a conference room downtown. Glass walls, long table, bottled water no one touched. My parents sat side by side. Their lawyer, a silver-haired man named Richard Cole, sat slightly forward, already in control of the room. Lauren, Richard began, we're concerned about the tone your attorney has taken. I looked at him calmly. The tone reflects the facts. My mother leaned in. Sweetheart, why are you doing this now? Everything was fine. It wasn't, I said, it was quiet. My father's jaw tightened. You're jeopardizing Rebecca's wedding. No, I said. I'm preventing unauthorized asset transfer. Richard raised a hand. Let's keep this constructive. He turned to me. Your role as trustee was always intended to be temporary. Then it should have been discussed openly, I replied. Not rewritten quietly. My father scoffed. You've always been rigid. I didn't react. Dana spoke for the first time. The trust requires unanimous consent for restructuring. My client was excluded from those discussions. That's not rigidity, that's procedure. Richard adjusted his glasses. We were acting in good faith. Good faith doesn't require secrecy, Dana said. The meeting dragged on. Polite language, subtle barbs, nothing explosive. And that was the point. They weren't angry yet. They were frustrated, because frustration comes when people realize manipulation is no longer working. At one point, my mother reached for my hand. I didn't pull away, but I didn't reciprocate. "We never wanted you to feel pushed out," she said quietly. "But you did push me out," I replied. "You just expected me not to notice." Silence followed. When the meeting ended, nothing was resolved, which meant everything had changed. Outside, my father stopped me. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Families don't operate like corporations." I met his eyes. "Then you shouldn't have tried to restructure one like one." That night, Rebecca called. She didn't start with hello. "Are you trying to ruin my life?" I closed my eyes. "No," I said, "I'm protecting mine." "You've always resented me," she snapped. That surprised me. "Resentment implies desire," I said calmly. "This is about boundaries." She laughed bitterly. "You think you're better than us now?" I thought about that. "No," I said. "I just think I'm done being smaller so you can feel secure." She hung up. The next escalation came quietly. Dana emailed me a document late Friday night. "Lauren," she wrote, "I reviewed prior tax filings tied to the trust. There's something irregular." I sat up. "What kind of irregular?" "Funds used for personal expenses. Not egregious, but outside scope." My chest tightened. "How long?" "At least a year." My parents hadn't just planned to remove me. They had already started treating the assets as theirs. That realization changed the shape of everything. This wasn't about exclusion anymore. It was about misuse. I called Dana immediately. "What are our options?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "You can request a formal audit. That will freeze certain actions." "And the wedding?" Dana didn't answer that part. I knew the answer anyway. An audit would be public, slow, disruptive. It would not care about timelines or feelings. I looked at my calendar. 3 weeks until the wedding. For the first time, I understood something clearly. They had assumed I would protect the event. I had always protected the event, but I wasn't obligated to anymore. I told Dana to prepare the request. After we hung up, I sat alone in my apartment, lights off, city noise drifting through the window. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt resolved. Because what I was about to do wasn't retaliation. It was correction. And once you correct a system that has depended on your silence, it doesn't collapse politely. It exposes everything it was built to hide. The wedding was no longer just a celebration. It was a deadline. And this time I wasn't the one under pressure. The audit request landed like a quiet bomb. There was no announcement. No dramatic notification. Just a formal filing sent through the appropriate channels, stamped, dated, and impossible to ignore. Dana called me an hour after it was submitted. "They've been notified," she said. "Your parents and the advisory firm. Certain transactions are now temporarily restricted." I closed my eyes, not in relief but in recognition. This was the point of no return. That evening, my phone rang until it stopped meaning anything. Missed calls from my mother, 2 from my father, 1 from Rebecca. Then silence, the kind that follows when people realize yelling won't work. I made dinner, ate slowly, washed dishes, ordinary movements grounding me in a moment that felt anything but ordinary. At 9:47 p.m., my father texted, "You've crossed a line." I stared at the words, then typed back, "So did you." Nothing else. The next morning, the family logistics company froze discretionary spending connected to the trust. Vendors were notified. Property managers paused non-essential work. A ripple effect I'd anticipated but hadn't fully felt until it began. Dana sent me an update. "The auditor has questions. They want explanations for several expense categories charged to trust accounts." I asked which ones. "Travel? Dining? Personal reimbursements? Legal retainers unrelated to trust administration?" I imagined my parents' faces as they read the inquiry, the confusion giving way to irritation, then to fear. Not because they'd done something outrageous, but because someone outside the family was now reading the fine print. Families survive on the assumption that no one looks too closely. That assumption was gone. By afternoon, Rebecca showed up at my apartment. She didn't knock politely. She knocked like someone who expected to be let in. I opened the door and stepped aside without speaking. She walked in, eyes already wet. "What did you do?" she demanded. I closed the door behind her. "I initiated an audit," I said. Her face twisted. "Do you have any idea what this is doing?" "Yes." "Mom hasn't stopped crying. Dad's on the phone with lawyers. The venue is asking questions. Vendors are nervous." I waited. "You always do this," she continued. "You make things complicated when they don't need to be." I studied her, then really studied her. The way she held herself like the center of the room, even when everything was unraveling around her. "They needed to be complicated," I said, "because they weren't honest." She shook her head. "You're jealous. You've always been jealous." I didn't respond immediately. Jealousy would have meant I wanted what she had. What I wanted was accountability. This isn't about you, Rebecca, I said calmly. It's about misuse of assets I'm legally responsible for. She laughed sharp and disbelieving. You sound like a lawyer. I didn't correct her. She stepped closer. If this wedding gets postponed, if everything falls apart, that's on you. I met her gaze. No, I said. It's on the people who assumed I'd protect them from consequences. Her eyes searched my face looking for hesitation, for guilt. She didn't find it. She left without another word. That night, Dana sent me a secure message. Lauren, there's something you should prepare for. If the audit confirms misuse, you'll have to decide whether to escalate further. Escalate how I asked. By formally removing your parents from any advisory role tied to the trust. Possibly seeking restitution. Restitution. The word sat heavy in my chest. I thought about my childhood home. The dinners. The quiet expectations. The way my parents spoke about sacrifice while quietly benefiting from it. What happens if I don't, I asked. Then the misuse stops now, but the past remains unresolved. I didn't answer right away. The next escalation came from an unexpected direction. The wedding venue emailed me directly. Lauren Hale. They wrote, we've been advised you're the trustee for assets tied to this event. We need clarification regarding payment authorization. I stared at the screen. They had put my name on the paperwork. Without telling me, I forwarded the email to Donna. She called immediately. They use trust-backed guarantees for the venue deposit, she said. That ties you directly to the event financially. My stomach tightened. Without my consent. Yes. I sat down hard on the couch. That wasn't just misuse. That was assumption turned into liability. Dana's voice was steady. This strengthens your position, but it also raises the stakes. I knew what she meant. The wedding wasn't just symbolic anymore. It was entangled. That evening, my mother finally called again. I answered. Her voice cracked as soon as she spoke. Lauren, please, we can talk about this. Privately. There was something new in her tone. Not authority. Not manipulation. Fear. I said nothing. We never meant to take advantage of you, she said quickly. We just needed flexibility. You used trust funds for personal expenses, I replied evenly, and tied me to contracts without my approval. She inhaled sharply. We're family. That word again, always deployed when rules appeared. Families don't require secrecy, I said. They don't require assumption. She began to cry then openly. Do you know what people will think? I closed my eyes. For the first time, I heard it clearly. This wasn't about Rebecca. This wasn't about love. This was about reputation. I said one sentence. I won't be absorbing this for you. She went quiet. After we hung up, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, not joy. Release. Because the truth was finally out in the open where it belonged. 2 days later, the auditor issued a preliminary finding. Misuse confirmed. Scope under review. Dana sent it with a single line. They're no longer in control of the timeline. Neither was I. But I wasn't pretending to be. That night, I stood by my window and watched the city lights flicker on one by one. The wedding was in 10 days. My parents were scrambling. My sister was furious. The family narrative was unraveling. And for the first time, I understood something with absolute clarity. I wasn't destroying anything. I was simply refusing to hold together a structure that had been quietly collapsing for years. The consequences were finally catching up, and this time I wasn't stepping in front of them. The wedding was officially postponed on a Thursday afternoon. I didn't hear it from my family. I heard it from Dana. The venue invoked a contractual pause clause, she said. Payment authority couldn't be confirmed. They're suspending the date pending resolution. I closed my eyes and let the words settle. Postponed wasn't canceled, not yet. It was a delay framed as logistics, not consequence. But everyone involved understood what it meant. The illusion of control had cracked. Within an hour, my phone exploded. My sister called first. I didn't answer. My mother followed, then my father, then Rebecca again, this time from a different number. I let it all go to voicemail. Because the moment someone is desperate to be heard is rarely the moment they're ready to listen. That evening, I received an email from my parents' attorney. The tone had changed. No more posturing. No more subtle shaming. They requested an emergency meeting. Dana asked me what I wanted to do. I thought about it carefully. I'll attend, I said, but I won't negotiate emotionally. The meeting took place the next morning. Same glass conference room as before. Same long table. But the energy was different. My parents looked tired, not angry, not righteous. Exposed. Their attorney opened with conciliatory language, regret, miscommunication, stress. I waited. My father spoke next. We never intended for things to go this far, he said. Intent doesn't erase impact, I replied. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. We didn't think you'd take it this far. That was the sentence that mattered. I looked at her calmly. You thought I would stop you quietly or not at all. Silence. Dana slid a document across the table. This outlines options moving forward, she said, including restitution and restructuring. My parents' attorney skimmed it quickly. His jaw tightened. This would remove our clients from any advisory role, he said. Yes, Dinah replied, temporarily or permanently depending on findings. My father looked at me then, really looked. You're punishing us. I shook my head. I'm correcting a misuse of authority. Rebecca burst into the room, late eyes, red makeup smeared. She hadn't been invited. She ignored the lawyers and came straight toward me. Are you happy now? She demanded. No one stopped her. The wedding is gone. Everyone's talking. People think we did something wrong. You did, I said quietly. Her face twisted. You always had to be right. I met her gaze. No, I just stopped being silent. She turned to our parents. Why didn't you tell me any of this? She cried. Why didn't you say there was a problem? My mother looked down. We were trying to protect you. From what Rebecca snapped, the truth. No one answered. That was the moment something shifted. Rebecca wasn't angry at me anymore. She was angry at them. The meeting ended without resolution. But something important had happened. The narrative had fractured. Outside, Dana walked with me to the elevator. You handled that well, she said. I exhaled slowly. I don't feel like I did. That's because you weren't performing, she replied. You were grounded. Over the next few days, the audit expanded. Additional accounts were reviewed. More questions were raised. Not catastrophic, but enough to confirm a pattern of entitlement. Meanwhile, my parents tried to regain footing. They called relatives, spun stories, framed me as overwhelmed, overly rigid, emotional. It didn't land, because facts don't care about tone. The family logistics company board requested my presence at a meeting, not as a courtesy, as a necessity. They wanted clarity. When I arrived, the room felt different than it had years earlier, more formal, more cautious. One board member spoke directly. Lauren, we need to know if the trust will continue backing operational guarantees. I answered honestly, only under conditions of transparency and revised oversight. They nodded. Another asked, are you prepared to assume full authority? I didn't hesitate. Yes. The vote was unanimous. When I left the building, I felt something unfamiliar. Not triumph. Alignment. That night, my father came to my apartment alone. He stood in the doorway, hands in his coat pockets. I didn't invite him in right away. We stood there, two adults who no longer recognized the roles we used to play. I didn't think you'd choose this path, he said quietly. I didn't either, I replied. But you didn't leave me another. He swallowed. You've always been dependable. I nodded. And you depended on that too much. He didn't argue. What happens now, he asked. I considered the question. Now I protect the trust, and myself. He looked past me into the apartment as if seeing my life for the first time. Your mother is afraid, he said. I believe that, I replied. He waited, perhaps hoping for reassurance. I didn't offer it. Before he left, he said one last thing. I never thought you'd walk away from us. I met his eyes. I didn't walk away, I said. I stopped standing in the way. He left without another word. That night I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. The wedding date passed quietly. No ceremony, no photos, no public collapse. Just absence. Rebecca posted nothing. My parents said nothing. The family, once loud and carefully curated, had gone still. The audit was ongoing, the legal questions unresolved. But something fundamental had changed. I was no longer reacting. I was no longer defending. I had reclaimed my position not through argument but through action. And the truth was clear now. The hardest part of setting boundaries isn't the backlash. It's realizing how much of your life was built around not needing them. The silence after the postponed wedding was heavier than the noise that came before it. No group texts, no frantic calls, no carefully worded family updates. My parents retreated behind closed doors and Rebecca disappeared entirely. It was as if the family had entered a holding pattern waiting for someone else to move first. They were used to that someone being me. I didn't. Instead, I focused on what was directly in front of me. The auditor's requests increased in frequency and specificity. Receipts, emails, authorizations. Each question peeled back another layer of assumptions my parents had relied on for years. They hadn't been reckless. They had been casual, confident that proximity equaled permission. Dana and I spoke almost daily now, not emotionally, strategically. They're trying to frame this as a misunderstanding rooted in stress, she said during one call. That might limit reputational damage, but it doesn't change liability. What's the risk to me, I asked. Minimal, she replied. You acted promptly once you identified the issue. That matters. I exhaled slowly. That was the first time in weeks I'd felt my shoulders drop. At work, my supervisor called me into her office. "You've been unusually focused lately," she said, in a good way. I smiled faintly. "Less distraction." She studied me for a moment. "There's an opening coming up. Senior role. More authority, more visibility. I want you to consider it." I nodded, surprised by how little fear I felt. "I will." That evening, Rebecca showed up again. This time she didn't knock. She sat on the floor outside my apartment door and waited until I opened it. She looked different, not frantic, just tired. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside and let her in. She didn't pace this time. She sat on the couch, hands folded in her lap like she was afraid of touching anything. I didn't know she said. About the money, about the audit, about any of it. I believed her. "They didn't want you to know," I said. "It was easier that way." She nodded slowly. "They told me you were trying to control everything, that you were angry, that you didn't want me to be happy." I waited. She looked up at me then. "Is that true?" "No," I said simply. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "I thought you were just different," she said. "Stronger, less affected." I shook my head. "I just learned how to hide it earlier." She swallowed. "The wedding was supposed to fix things," she said. "I thought once it happened, everything would settle." "Settle for whom?" I asked gently. She didn't answer. After a long pause, she said something I hadn't expected. "They asked me to sign something." I felt my stomach tighten. "What kind of something?" "A statement," she said, "saying I supported the transition plan, that I agreed you'd stepped back voluntarily." I looked at her carefully. "Did you?" "No," she said quickly. "I didn't understand it." And then everything blew up. That was the moment I realized Rebecca wasn't just a beneficiary of the system. She was also trapped inside it. "They've been managing your story too," I said. She nodded. "I don't know who I am without them organizing everything," she admitted. I thought of my father standing in my doorway uncertain, my mother crying about appearances, the family frozen without the structure I'd provided. "That's not your fault," I said, "but it is your responsibility now." She left an hour later, quieter than she'd arrived. The next day, Dana called with an update. "The audit is concluding. Preliminary findings will be issued this week." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means decisions are coming, and you'll be asked what you want to do next." That question echoed louder than I expected. What do I want? For most of my life, I'd defined my wants in relation to my family's needs. Even now, part of me waited for the reflex to kick in. It didn't. That afternoon, I received an email from the Family Logistics Company board. They wanted me to assume interim executive oversight effective immediately. No ceremony, no apology, just necessity. I accepted. That night, my mother finally called. I answered. Her voice was quiet, flat. "Your father's thinking about stepping away from the business," she said, "temporarily." I waited. "We didn't realize how much we relied on you," she continued. That wasn't an apology either. It was an observation. I said one thing. Reliance without respect becomes entitlement. She was silent for a long time. "I don't recognize our family anymore," she said. "Neither do I replied. "But maybe that's not a bad thing." The call ended without resolution. 2 days later, the auditor's report arrived. Clear, professional, unemotional. Misuse confirmed. Governance failures identified. Recommendations issued. Dinah summarized it in one sentence. They can't deny it anymore. The report went to all relevant parties: boards, advisors, attorneys. It didn't accuse. It documented. And documentation has a way of outlasting arguments. That evening, my father emailed me. Short, direct. "We will comply with the recommendations." No warmth, no resistance. Compliance. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. This wasn't victory. It was consequence. Rebecca texted later that night. "I don't know what happens next," she wrote. "Neither do I replied. "But it won't be decided without us this time." She sent back a single word. Okay. I slept well that night. Not because things were resolved, but because I wasn't carrying them alone anymore. The power dynamic had shifted not through confrontation, but through clarity. And once clarity enters a system built on silence, everything rearranges itself around it, whether the people inside it are ready or not. The report changed how people spoke to me. Not dramatically, not publicly, but in the pauses, in the careful wording of emails, in the way my name was no longer used as leverage but as authority. I noticed it first with the board. Meetings that once felt like updates became consultations. Questions were framed differently. Assumptions were checked instead of implied. I wasn't asked to smooth things over anymore. I was asked to decide. That shift carried weight I hadn't anticipated. Not because I craved control, but because I finally understood what responsibility actually felt like when it wasn't tangled with guilt. At home, the silence from my parents stretched on. Not hostile, not warm, just empty. Rebecca, however, stayed in contact. She called one evening while I was cooking dinner. "I talked to a counselor today," she said. I paused, knife hovering over the cutting board. "How did that go?" "Uncomfortable," she admitted. "Apparently that's normal." I smiled faintly. She hesitated. "They asked me why I was getting married. Not who, not when. Why?" "And I didn't have an answer," she said quietly. That honesty mattered. A week earlier, it would have sounded like drama. Now it sounded like growth. At work, I formally stepped into the interim executive role. My calendar filled quickly. Decisions stacked on top of each other. The logistics company needed restructuring, not just oversight. I implemented controls my grandmother would have approved of: clear reporting, separation of duties, no informal reimbursements, no exceptions based on proximity. One afternoon, while reviewing legacy contracts, I found something else: a clause buried in a shareholder agreement drafted years ago that gave the trustee final approval over any sale or merger involving trust-held shares. I forwarded it to Dana. She called me 10 minutes later. "They've been planning to sell part of the company," she said. "Without telling me. Without telling you," she confirmed. "Possibly without telling Rebecca either." That explained a lot. The urgency. The attempts to remove me quietly. The push to consolidate authority before the wedding. This wasn't just about access. It was about timing. They had needed me out of the way. That night, I slept poorly. Not from fear, but from the realization that things could have gone very differently if I'd continued playing my old role. I would have signed something eventually, attended the wedding, smiled, assumed everything was fine, and then the sale would have happened, without my consent, without my review, without my protection. The next morning, I asked Dana to draft a notice to halt any sale discussions pending full disclosure. She didn't hesitate. "This is where it becomes explicit," she said. "They won't be able to pretend anymore." I nodded. "Send it." The response came faster than I expected. My father called within an hour. "We need to talk," he said. I agreed to meet him, alone. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe near his office. No lawyers, no buffers. He looked tired, older than I remembered. "You think we were trying to cut you out," he said. I didn't answer immediately. "You were trying to move forward without accountability," I replied. "That required my absence." He stirred his coffee without drinking it. "We were trying to secure everyone's future." "At whose expense?" I asked. He didn't answer. I thought of something then, something my grandmother once said when I was young. People who rush you want something you haven't agreed to give. I met my father's eyes. "You should have told me about the sale." He nodded slowly. "You would have stopped it." "Yes," I said, "if it wasn't right." That was the truth, plain, undeniable. He sighed. "We didn't trust that." And there it was. The core of everything. Not betrayal born of malice, but fear of being told no. The meeting ended quietly, no shouting, no resolution. But something fundamental had shifted again. When you name the real motive out loud, it loses its power. A few days later, Rebecca came over. She sat at my kitchen table, running her fingers along the grain of the wood. "I called off the wedding," she said. I looked at her. "Not postponed. Cancelled," she confirmed. "Why?" She shrugged. I realized I didn't want to start a marriage while my entire life was being managed by people who didn't tell the truth. I respected that. "Mom isn't taking it well," she added. I believe that. Rebecca looked at me. "I don't think I ever asked you if you wanted this responsibility." I shook my head. "You didn't know you could." She nodded. "I'm trying to learn how to ask now." After she left, I stood alone in my kitchen, the house quiet again. This time the quiet didn't feel like absence. It felt like space. The board formally canceled sale discussions the following week. The audit recommendations were implemented, controls locked in. My parents were no longer decision makers. They were stakeholders. That distinction mattered. One evening, Dana called with a final update. "They're compliant," she said. Reluctant but compliant. I exhaled. "And you?" she asked. "How are you holding up?" I thought about it. "I feel intact," I said. She laughed softly. "That's a good word." The fallout wasn't finished. Relationships don't recalibrate overnight. Trust doesn't regenerate on command. But something irreversible had happened. I had reclaimed not just authority but authorship. Of my role, of my time, of my future. The system that once depended on my silence now had to function without it. And for the first time, that didn't feel like loss. It felt like alignment. The weeks after the wedding cancellation felt unreal, like living in the echo of something that should have happened but didn't. People kept asking Rebecca what her plans were. Some asked gently, others with curiosity thinly veiled as judgment. She handled it better than I expected. Short answers, no explanations. A quiet firmness that hadn't been there before. My parents, on the other hand, unraveled in smaller, less visible ways. They didn't call as often. When they did, the conversations were cautious, as if they were speaking to someone whose reactions they no longer knew how to predict. The casual authority they once carried in my presence was gone. Every request sounded tentative now. I noticed it most when my mother asked if she could access old trust documents to review something. I told her to email Dana. There was a long pause before she agreed. That pause said everything. At the logistics company, the changes I'd implemented began to ripple outward. Vendors adjusted, managers recalibrated, long-standing habits were questioned, not resisted aggressively but quietly reworked. Transparency has a way of exhausting people who are used to shortcuts. One afternoon, a senior manager pulled me aside after a meeting. I didn't realize how much we relied on informal approvals, he said. This feels stricter. It is stricter, I replied, and safer. He nodded slowly. I can see that now. That was the pattern everywhere. Initial discomfort, followed by clarity. At home, my own routines shifted. I started leaving my phone in another room at night. I slept more deeply. The constant low-level vigilance I'd carried for years began to fade. I hadn't realized how much energy it consumed until it was gone. Rebecca came by again one Saturday morning. She brought coffee, no agenda. We sat at the table in silence for a while. I'm angry, she said finally. I nodded. That makes sense. Not just at them, she continued, at myself. I didn't want to see it. It was easier to let things be handled for me. You were encouraged to do that, I said. She looked at me sharply. That doesn't absolve me. She was right. Accountability isn't about blame, it's about recognition. I don't know what I want next, she admitted. I feel like my life paused and I don't know how to restart it. I considered my answer carefully. You don't restart it, I said. You continue it, just with more awareness. She absorbed that. Later that week, Dana called with news I'd been expecting but still felt strange to hear. Your parents' advisory role has officially ended, she said. The board ratified it unanimously. I closed my eyes. Any response from them, they're not contesting it. That was significant. Not because it meant acceptance, but because it meant exhaustion. They were tired of fighting a system that no longer bent to them. That evening, my father called. His voice was quieter than usual. I'm stepping down from the company, he said. Fully. I waited. I think it's time, he added. I didn't congratulate him. I didn't reassure him. I said I hope you find something that fits who you are now. He was silent for a moment. I don't know who that is, Lauren, I answered honestly. Neither did I for a long time. We ended the call without tension, without warmth either. Just truth. The next development came unexpectedly. The board offered me the executive role permanently. I asked for time to consider it, not because I doubted myself, but because I wanted to be sure I wasn't stepping into another version of the same trap. Power without boundaries is just another form of erasure. After a weekend of reflection, I accepted. On my terms. Clear scope, clear authority, clear exit clauses. Dana reviewed everything, approved it. When I signed the contract, my hand didn't shake. The irony wasn't lost on me. The act of signing had once been used to quietly take power from me. Now it was how I claimed it. Rebecca texted me that night. I'm proud of you. I replied. I'm proud of us. The family dynamic didn't heal. It recalibrated. My parents stopped trying to manage outcomes. They stopped asking me to fix things. They started sitting with discomfort instead of outsourcing it. That was their work to do, not mine. As spring turned towards summer, the story people told about our family shifted. Less polished, less impressive, more real. Some people pulled away. Others leaned in. That didn't concern me. What mattered was this. I no longer felt like my value was conditional. I wasn't needed to maintain the illusion. I was respected because I refused to. Chapter 9 wasn't dramatic. No confrontations, no grand apologies. Just the steady, undeniable shift that happens when power changes hands without permission being asked. And for the first time, I understood something deeply. Peace doesn't come from fixing broken systems. It comes from stepping out of them and letting them face themselves. One chapter remained. Not to settle scores, but to decide what kind of life I wanted now that I no longer belonged to the old one. When the title became official, nothing in my daily life changed right away. That surprised me. No applause, no announcement dinner, no sudden sense of arrival. Just a revised signature line in my email and a calendar that filled faster than before. What did change was how people waited. They waited for my answer. They waited for my decision. They waited instead of assuming. That was new. The first real test came with the Riverside property, a parcel of land the company had owned for decades but never developed. For years, it had been treated like a bargaining chip, mentioned vaguely whenever my father wanted leverage in conversations that never quite went anywhere. Now a developer was interested, serious, aggressive, pressing for speed. The board looked to me. I asked for time. I reviewed everything myself: environmental reports, zoning history, long-term value projections. I brought in an independent consultant, someone with no ties to the family or the company's past. When I finally said no, it wasn't dramatic. It just wasn't the right deal. The developer pushed back, harder than I expected. He implied I was being overly cautious, that I lacked vision. I listened. Then I ended the meeting. 2 days later, he came back with better terms. That was the lesson. Decisiveness doesn't require loudness. It requires consistency. At home, I began to notice changes in myself that had nothing to do with work. I stopped replaying conversations in my head. I stopped drafting explanations I'd never send. When my phone buzzed, my body didn't tense automatically. One evening, I caught myself humming while making dinner. That startled me more than any confrontation ever had. Rebecca noticed it too. "You seem lighter," she said one night when we met for a walk along the river. "I feel quieter," I corrected. She smiled. "I think that's what light feels like." She told me she'd enrolled in a certificate program. Something unrelated to weddings or expectations. Something she chose without asking permission first. I didn't praise her. I didn't overreact. I said, "That sounds like you." She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath, waiting for approval she didn't need anymore. My parents stayed distant. Not cold, just separate. Occasionally, my mother would send a text about something ordinary. A recipe. A neighbor. The weather. I replied politely, briefly. My father stopped calling altogether. At first, I wondered if that hurt. Then I realized it didn't. What hurt was the effort it used to take to maintain proximity that never quite became connection. This distance was honest. The audit formally closed in late summer. Findings documented. Corrections implemented. No further action required. Dana called me with the news. "This chapter is done," she said. I thanked her, not just for her work, but for her steadiness. She'd never told me how to feel. She'd never framed this as empowerment or justice. She'd treated it like what it was, a correction of imbalance. That night, I opened the folder on my laptop labeled Family. It was thinner now. Archived emails, final reports, old drafts that no longer mattered. I didn't delete it, I just stopped opening it. The company continued forward, slowly, intentionally. We turned down more deals than we accepted. People adjusted, some left, others stayed and adapted. I learned something important during that time. Not everyone is meant to follow you when you stop being useful to their narrative. That's not failure, that's clarity. One afternoon as I was leaving the office, my assistant said something casually. "You don't seem afraid of conflict." I paused. "I'm not afraid of it," I said. "I'm just no longer shaped by it." She nodded as if that made sense. It did to me. Later that evening, my mother called unexpectedly. I answered. Her voice was softer than usual. "I found some old photos today," she said. "Of you as a child. You were always so serious." I smiled faintly. I was paying attention. She hesitated. "I don't think we ever asked what that cost you." The sentence hung between us. I didn't rush to fill the silence. Eventually, I said, "It cost me time, but I'm not angry about that anymore." She breathed out slowly. "I'm glad you're doing well," she said. "So am I." We hung up without ceremony. Afterward, I sat alone in my living room and let the moment pass without trying to define it. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't closure. It was recognition. And that was enough. As fall approached, I took a week off work for the first time in years, not for a family obligation, not for recovery, just because I wanted to. I went north, stayed somewhere quiet, walked in the mornings, read in the afternoons, thought very little about the future. For the first time, the future didn't feel like something I needed to brace for. It felt open. Chapter 10 wasn't about triumph. It was about stabilization. The calm that comes after you stop performing, stop managing, stop anticipating collapse. I hadn't rebuilt my family. I had rebuilt myself. And that foundation felt solid enough to stand on even if everything else shifted again. One chapter left. Not to look back, but to decide what forward actually meant now that it finally belonged to me. The first time I returned to my parents' house after everything, it felt smaller. Not physically. The rooms were the same, the furniture unchanged, but the space no longer pressed against me the way it used to. There was no invisible script telling me where to stand or how to behave. I noticed that immediately. My mother had invited me for coffee. Just coffee. No agenda. No family meeting disguised as concern. I agreed because I wanted to know how it would feel to be there now that I wasn't playing my old role. She opened the door with a careful smile. "Thank you for coming," she said. Inside, the house was quieter than I remembered. Fewer framed photos, fewer staged surfaces. The place looked lived in rather than curated. We sat at the kitchen table. She poured coffee, hands steady but deliberate. "Your father's out," she said, "running errands." I nodded. She didn't rush into conversation. That too was new. After a moment, she said, "I've been thinking a lot about how things unfolded." I waited. "Not about the audit," she clarified. "About before that." She folded her hands together. "We always thought we were helping by handling things for you." I looked at her calmly. "You were deciding for me," I said. "That's different." She nodded slowly. "I see that now." It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't deflection either. I didn't fill the space. She went on, "You were so capable, so calm. We assumed you didn't need space." That assumption shaped my entire childhood, I thought. But I didn't say it. Instead, I said being capable doesn't mean being unaffected. She looked down at her cup. "I know." We sat in silence again, not tense, just quiet. When I left, there was no dramatic goodbye, just a brief hug. Careful, real. I didn't feel lighter afterward. I felt complete. At work, the permanent role began to feel routine. Not easy, just familiar. I learned which decisions required consensus and which required conviction. I learned how to say no without cushioning it, how to hold firm without explaining myself into exhaustion. One afternoon, the board chair asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Do you miss how things were?" I considered it. "No," I said. "I miss who I thought I was supposed to be for everyone else, but not who I actually was." He nodded like he understood more than he said. Rebecca called that night. "I signed the lease today," she said. "New place, smaller, mine." I smiled. "How does it feel?" "Terrifying and right." That combination sounded familiar. We talked for a while about ordinary things, her program, my work, nothing heavy. Before we hung up, she said, "I'm still figuring out how to be your sister without competing with you." I appreciated the honesty. "We're learning," I replied. "That counts." As winter approached, the company finalized its annual report. Clean numbers, no surprises, no footnotes explaining exceptions. I signed off on it without ceremony. Later that evening, I opened my journal again. I hadn't written in weeks. Not because I was avoiding anything, but because the need to process had eased. This time I wrote about something different. I wrote about control. How easily it disguises itself as care. How often it hides inside family language. How being loved conditionally can feel like safety until the conditions tighten. I wrote one sentence and underlined it twice. Clarity feels cold at first because it removes illusion. That was true. Illusions are warm, predictable. They give you a role to play. Clarity gives you responsibility. My father called a few days later. I hadn't expected that. We met for lunch, neutral place, quiet. He looked older than before, not defeated, just less armored. "I didn't expect things to turn out this way," he said. "Neither did I." He stirred his soup. "I thought keeping control meant keeping the family together." I met his eyes. Control doesn't create closeness, it creates compliance. He absorbed that. After a moment, he said, "I don't know how to relate to you now." I answered honestly, "Neither do I. But that doesn't mean we can't learn." We didn't resolve anything that day. We didn't need to. We named the truth and left it where it was. As the year wound down, invitations came in for holiday gatherings. Some I accepted, some I declined. I no longer felt the need to justify either choice. That freedom was quiet but absolute. On a cold December evening, I stood by my window, watching snow fall lightly over the street below. The city moved on indifferent to my family's shifts and reckonings. That felt comforting. I thought about the version of myself from a year ago. The one who assumed silence was kindness, that endurance was virtue, that love meant staying available no matter the cost. I didn't feel ashamed of her. I felt grateful. She had carried things long enough for me to put them down. Chapter 11 wasn't about reconciliation. It was about redefinition, of family, of responsibility, of self. I hadn't erased my past. I had recontextualized it, and that made room for something I hadn't allowed myself to imagine before. A future that didn't require permission. One chapter remained. Not to explain what I had lost, but to articulate what I had chosen instead. The year ended quietly. No dramatic reconciliation, no public reckoning, no final speech where everything made sense all at once. Just days that stacked on top of each other without requiring me to manage anyone else's emotions. That was how I knew something fundamental had changed. On the morning of December 31st, I woke before my alarm. The city outside was muted, the sky pale and undecided. I lay still for a moment and did something I'd never done before. I checked in with myself before checking anything else. No tightness, no anticipatory dread, no mental inventory of who might need me today. I got up, made coffee, and sat by the window watching people move through the cold. Ordinary lives, ordinary urgency, nothing tied to me. It felt right. Later that afternoon, Rebecca stopped by. She was bundled in a coat too big for her hair pulled back without care. She looked like someone who had finally stopped performing. I brought leftovers, she said, holding up a container. Thought we could eat together. We did. On the couch, no table settings, no roles. After a while, she said, I think this is the first New Year's Eve I haven't been planning my life around someone else's expectations. I nodded. It's unsettling, she added, but also honest. That word again. Honest. She hesitated, then asked, Do you regret any of it? I knew what she meant. The audit, the wedding fallout, the distance that now existed where certainty used to be. I thought carefully before answering. I regret how long it took me to believe I was allowed to choose myself, I said. I don't regret the choice. She smiled faintly. I don't think I would have ever questioned things if you hadn't. That wasn't something I needed to carry, but I appreciated the acknowledgement. After she left, I spent the evening alone. No party, no countdown noise, just quiet music and a book I'd been meaning to finish. At midnight, I didn't make a wish. I made a decision. The next year would not be about repair. It would be about direction. In January, I formally declined an invitation to rejoin any family advisory role. It was framed as a chance to restore balance. I didn't argue with the phrasing. I simply said no. At work, the company entered a period of steady growth. No dramatic leaps, no risky expansions, just measured progress. People stopped asking me who I answered to. They already knew. My parents adjusted in their own ways. My mother found new routines. My father withdrew from public leadership and leaned into quieter interests. We spoke occasionally, cordially, without expectation. We were no longer enmeshed. We were related. That distinction mattered. One afternoon in early spring, I visited my grandmother's lake house for the first time since everything changed. The place was empty, quiet, sunlight spilling across floors she'd once polished herself. I walked through the room slowly. This was where she'd taught me how to read documents, how to sit with discomfort, how to notice when someone was rushing me. She hadn't taught me how to fight. She'd taught me how to hold my ground. Standing there, I finally understood why she'd chosen me. Not because I would keep the family together, but because I would keep the truth intact. I locked the door behind me and felt no sadness, only respect. If there's a lesson in all of this, it isn't dramatic. It doesn't fit on a quote graphic. It's this: when people benefit from your silence, they will call your voice betrayal. When people benefit from your labor, they will call your boundaries cruelty. And when you stop doing both, they will say you've changed. They're right. I had. Not into someone harder, but into someone clearer. I didn't take revenge. I took responsibility for my name, my time, my future. And in doing so, I stopped participating in a system that required me to disappear for it to function. That was the moment the power truly shifted. If you're hearing this and recognizing parts of your own life in it, I want you to know something important. You don't need permission to stop explaining yourself. You don't need consensus to set a boundary. You don't need to stay loyal to a version of family that survives by diminishing you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to confront. It's to step back, sign the paper, make the call, and let the silence speak for you. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like it, share it, or leave a comment. Your story might be someone else's clarity. And if you want to hear more stories about family drama, betrayal, quiet revenge, and the moment the tables finally turn, subscribe and stay. Thank you for listening. This wasn't the story of what I lost. It was the story of what I finally chose, and I wouldn't trade that choice for anything.